Good evening, my sleepy friend. Tonight, we'll drift quietly back in time, not into a royal court or a battlefield or even a quiet village meadow. No, tonight you and I are going somewhere messier, louder, stranger, a medieval tavern. Dim the lights, settle into your favorite blanket, let your body melt into rest. And if this journey helps you relax, feel free to like and subscribe, only if it feels right. Now close your eyes and listen to the door creak open. The air hits you first, a thick, soupy mix of smoke, sweat, roasted meat, and something sharp and yeasty that might be ale, or just someone's unwashed feet. Welcome to your night in a medieval tavern. It's crowded, loud, flickering with orange torchlight. Every wooden beam above your head is blackened with soot. The rafters are low. You'd have to duck if you were tall, but most people here aren't. The floor? Packed dirt, a little sticky in places, a little mysterious in others. Let me take you by the sleeve gently now and lead you through the crowd. To your left, a farmer, or maybe a butcher, is laughing so hard his tankard spills across the table. It seeps into the wood, adds another ring to the dozens already carved there. His laugh is more like a bark, followed by a hiccup. To your right, a fiddler scraping out a tune, not quite in tune, but fast and loud and oddly catchy. People stomp along to the rhythm, not always in time. Boots slam. Tankards clink. Somewhere in the back, someone breaks into song, though no one asked for it. Could you make it through the night in a place like this? Well, that depends. Let's find you a place to sit. A rickety stool at a corner table. Sticky, a bit wobbly, but it'll do. You ease down, careful not to touch the dried something on the bench beside you. Probably just spilled stew. A barmaid slides by, balancing 3 wooden mugs on one arm, a tray of pie slices on the other. She's moving fast, but her eyes catch everything. You nod, and she raises an eyebrow. "All or cider?" she calls. "Let's say cider. It feels safer." She slaps the mug down in front of you. It sloshes. It smells tangy. A little like vinegar, a little like apples that gave up last week. You sip. It's warm, but it does the trick. Your fellow table mates eye you. One has only 3 teeth. Another keeps scratching. But they nod politely, and that's enough. No one here asks too many questions. Time slips strangely in a place like this. One moment it's dusk. The next, it's midnight. Above you, a candle guttering in its holder drips wax into someone's unattended stew. They don't notice. They're arm wrestling, growling, breath steaming in the torchlight. You glance around the room. Over there, a bard is trying to recite a story, but keeps getting interrupted by a man who thinks he knows it better. They argue over the ending. Neither of them is right. Near the hearth, a dog sleeps, belly up, dreaming of bones. A cat on the windowsill watches everything like a judgmental god. And behind the bar, the innkeeper, a woman with arms like hams and eyes like sharp flint, polishes mugs with something that used to be a rag and now just spreads the dirt around evenly. Would you eat here? Well, if you're brave. Tonight's stew smells mostly edible. Root vegetables mostly. Maybe parsnip. Maybe turnip. Maybe hoof? There's always a hint of something unknown in medieval stew. Something chewy. You decide not to ask. Pie's better. It's hard, yes, and cold, but it has berries, or something purple anyway. The tavern door opens, letting in a blast of cold air and a swirl of leaves. A traveler stomps in, cloak wet, cheeks red. He orders mulled wine and sits near the fire, shivering. A few locals glance his way. Outsiders are interesting, suspicious, worth watching. The fire crackles. Someone throws in a log and sparks jump up like fireflies. The warmth spreads slowly, sticky and smoky, seeping into your bones. You're getting used to the smell now. In fact, it's almost comforting. Someone begins singing again. A new song this time. Something about a maiden, a goat, and a barrel of mead. It doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. The chorus is catchy. You hum along, then forget the tune before the second verse. Midnight comes, and still the tavern hums. Some people doze at their tables. Others argue about grain prices or which night is the drunkest. A man in the corner pulls out a rat from his coat and bets it can beat someone else's in a race. A tiny course is set up. The stakes are high, the rats are sleepy. Would you stay the night here? Ah, that's the final test. The innkeeper points you to the loft, a small wooden ladder, creaky and narrow. You climb, careful not to knock over the ale mug resting on the third rung. It belongs to no one. It's always been there. Upstairs, the room is quiet. Mostly 4 straw beds, one already occupied by someone snoring deeply, another by someone who's murmuring in their sleep. The other 2? Empty, for now. You take one. The straw pokes through the thin sheet. There's a blanket, scratchy wool, probably shared by dozens over the years. You pull it up anyway. And you lie there, eyes adjusting to the darkness, while the tavern below thumps and hums and fades slowly into the quiet hours. Could you make it through the night in a medieval tavern? Well, you just did. And now, as the last candle gutters out and the bard forgets his own ending, let's wander onward into another strange corner of time. Come now, gentle dreamer. Pull your blanket closer. Let the fire crackle low, because tonight we won't gallop into heroic tales or dine in candlelit halls. No, tonight we're treading into something stickier, itchy, wheezy, feverish. Yes, we're talking about getting sick. Long, long ago. Dim the lights, take a slow breath, and be glad, truly glad, that you are tucked safely in your modern bed, far from the potions and poultices of centuries past. If you caught a cold today, you might make tea. Take something fizzy. Rest for a bit. But in the 14th century, a sniffle wasn't just a sniffle. It was a mystery, a curse, a message from the heavens. Or worse, a punishment. Let me take you into a small cottage, somewhere in rural England, midwinter. Smoke curls out from the chimney. Inside, someone is coughing, loud, wet, like a goat with a drum in its chest. The family gathers around. They don't know what to do, not really, but they know something must be done. So they begin. A neighbor brings over a mixture of garlic, vinegar, and crushed snails. They mash it into a poultice and spread it on the chest. For warmth, for healing. For smell? No one knows. The local wise woman arrives. She inspects the patient's tongue, sniffs their breath, and announces solemnly, "Too much black bile." She prescribes boiled leeks, or leeches, or both. Sometimes they just prayed. After all, many illnesses were believed to be sent by God or caused by sin. So if you fell ill, you might be instructed to confess, apologize to your neighbors, or donate your best chicken to the church just to be safe. Still feel that tickle in your throat? Let's fast forward to ancient Greece, where Hippocrates, a man with strong opinions and a very large beard, believed that all illness stemmed from imbalanced humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Get a fever? Too much blood. The cure? Well, obviously, remove some blood. Welcome to bloodletting, a practice that involved knives, leeches, or if you were fancy, gold-plated scarificators. Because what better way to cure a headache than by opening a vein? The patient would lie back, pale and sweaty, while someone in a robe muttered something vaguely medical and caught their blood in a bowl. If they fainted, all the better. That meant it was working. And if they didn't survive, well, The disease must have been strong, or the sin too great. But don't worry, they'd still thank the doctor. In medieval cities, when someone showed signs of fever or rash, neighbors got twitchy. Out came the herbs. Rosemary, lavender, wormwood, hung over the doors, stuffed in pockets, burned in piles. They believed scent could ward off sickness, which is a polite way of saying everything smelled a little weird. You might find yourself lying in bed with an onion tied to your foot, or a toad in a pouch placed under your pillow, or a pigeon, yes. In the 1600s, doctors in London would sometimes press a live pigeon to the soles of a patient's feet. Why? To draw out the disease, of course. The pigeon did not approve. Neither, probably, did the patient. Let's drift now into a Native American village where illness was treated with deep respect. Healers used herbal medicine, ceremony, and song. The sick were cleansed with smoke from sacred plants. The spirit, body, and mind were treated as one. There was rhythm to healing, breath, patience, and not a single pigeon. Meanwhile, in Europe, if you had a toothache, the local remedy was simple. Hold a frog in your mouth. Yes, a frog, just for a moment, while chanting a rhyme. They also believed worms caused tooth pain, not the squirmy kind, but invisible tooth worms that lived in your molars and squealed when you chewed. The cure? Burn a mix of henbane and goat fat near the mouth. If you heard a high-pitched squeal, they said, the worm was dying. No worms were ever actually seen, but the tradition continued for hundreds of years. In the Middle East, scholars studied medicine deeply, dissecting, testing, experimenting. In ancient Baghdad, hospitals were built with running water and gardens, offering rest, diagnosis, and herbal treatments. They believed in balancing diet, emotion, and breath. If you were lucky enough to fall ill there, you might be fed chicken broth with saffron, treated with rose oil, or given dates soaked in vinegar. Still strange by today's standards, but compared to frogs and bloodletting, rather luxurious. And then there was the plague. Ah, yes, that most infamous of medieval illnesses. If you so much as coughed during plague times, people scattered like cats in a thunderstorm. Homes were boarded up. Bells rang to mark the dead. Entire towns disappeared. Treatments ranged from prayer to flagellation to drinking crushed emeralds. Did they work? Not at all. But they were desperate and terrified. In some places, people believed that laughter was the best cure, so jesters were hired to visit the sick. In others, silence was mandatory. Not a word spoken in the house, lest the illness hear you and grow stronger. Some believed a sharp breeze could carry sickness. Others thought it came from looking at someone with the wrong eyes. And some simply believed that if you survived the night, you were cured. Many didn't, and yet people kept trying. Every era had its tonics, its oddball doctors, its well-meaning neighbors with soup and sage. People boiled roots, sang spells, danced to heal, smeared honey on burns, whispered to the moon, wrapped fevers in linen soaked in goat's milk. And yes, sometimes it worked. Sometimes. And now, as you lie here, safe, warm, perhaps grateful for a bottle of cough syrup nearby, imagine what it was like to face the unknown with nothing but a smelly poultice and a prayer. To close your eyes, not knowing if morning would come. To trust a stranger with stained hands and a jar of something suspicious. To be just sick enough to sleep through the night, but not so sick you didn't wake. That's bravery in a way. And you, my quiet friend, have made it through the worst of it. No leeches, no frogs, just dreams. So breathe deeply now. The herbs are hung. The fire is low. The pigeon, it's gone. And as the sickness of the old world slips quietly behind us, let's wander gently toward another shadowy corner of history. Hush now. The stars are already peeking out, and the wind has quieted its chatter. This is a different kind of darkness, not the kind you know where a flick of a switch brings back the light, but the deep, velvet dark of long ago. Tonight we drift into the quiet after sunset, a time when the world dimmed and the only lights were fire, moon, and imagination. What did your ancestors actually do after dark, when there was no electricity? Well, let's step inside and find out. First, imagine it. The sun has just dipped below the treetops. The fields are still warm with the day's heat, but already the shadows have lengthened. In the small wooden home where your great, many times removed ancestors lived, night has arrived. There's no television, no glowing rectangles, no humming refrigerators. Just you, your family, the dim orange flicker of firelight, and time. So much time. In the Middle Ages, sundown marked a soft shift in rhythm. After the evening meal, usually something simple like stew, porridge, or bread and cheese, the coals were banked in the hearth, and the door was barred. People didn't wander far after dark. Roads were rough. Wolves were real. And if something made a sound in the forest, you let it be. Instead, they gathered around the fire. Children lay belly down on the packed earth, their fingers sticky with bread crusts, their eyes wide, waiting for stories. Because that's what night was for. Telling. Stories passed down by word of mouth. Tales of brave knights and clever foxes, of saints and sinners, and shadows that whispered in the rafters. Grandmother might spin wool while telling them, her fingers working without pause. The youngest child might fall asleep curled near the dog, the firelight casting gentle shadows on their cheek. And if you think the dark was boring, think again. People worked at night. Quietly, yes, but purposefully. In rural homes, women might shell beans by candlelight, mend socks, or stitch patches onto well-worn tunics. Men sharpened tools, plaited ropes, or carved handles for farm gear. In cities, shopkeepers would take stock. Apprentices cleaned the tools of their trades. The glow of a candle behind a shutter often meant someone still toiling. But here's something you may not know. Your ancestors didn't always sleep in one long stretch like we do today. No, many practiced something called segmented sleep. They went to bed not long after dark, slept for a few hours, then woke around midnight or so for what was called the first waking. And what did they do then? Oh, all sorts of things. Some prayed in the quiet, in the hush, believing this time was holier. Others visited neighbors. Yes, at midnight. They called it watching, sitting quietly by the hearth, talking softly, stoking the fire. Some couples, well, reconnected, with fewer chores and more privacy. And then after an hour or two, they returned to bed for their second sleep. Imagine that, a soft intermission in your night, a moment for stillness, thought, maybe tea if you had it. Then slipping back into slumber like a cat curling into a fresh patch of sun. In ancient Rome, evenings were often full of baths, conversation, and candlelight reading, if you were wealthy enough to afford candles and scrolls. The poor used oil lamps, or the firelight itself. A Roman family might sit together in the courtyard, sharing figs, sipping wine, listening to the soft music of a lyre, played badly by an enthusiastic cousin. In Scandinavia, the long, cold nights stretched on and on. So people crafted. They carved wood into toys, spoons, charms. They embroidered. They told long sagas, each detail remembered perfectly, passed from mouth to ear like precious heirlooms. And sometimes they just sat, quiet, still, watching the flames, listening to the crackle, thinking. There's something tender about that kind of silence. In Africa, after the sun dipped below the horizon, the village glowed with communal fires. People gathered to eat, to dance, to tell stories about the stars. Children played until their eyelids drooped. Elders whispered legends that curled up into the night sky like smoke. There were no lights, but there was life. And in Asia, in lantern-lit rooms, scholars read poetry aloud. Tea was brewed in heavy ceramic pots. Families gathered around low tables to share sweets and memories. The dark was not feared. It was a time for presence. And everywhere, from snow-covered huts to desert tents, people listened to the night, to owls calling, to trees creaking, to the quiet rhythm of their own breathing. Sometimes that was enough. Even the moon mattered more. People watched its phases, believed it governed sleep, madness, luck. A full moon meant more light, enough to walk safely, to see your sheep, to sneak to your lover's house if you were quiet. A new moon, black sky, black earth. Best to stay inside and tell stories. Did they ever get bored? Perhaps, but perhaps not in the way we do, because the dark was a different kind of companion back then. It was slower, softer. It invited you inward. You might lie awake, listening to the fire sigh, watching shadows dance on the ceiling. You might dream with your eyes open, or pray without words. And when sleep finally came, it was earned. It was deep. It was thick as honey and soft as wool. So tonight, as you rest in your bed, maybe with a glowing screen nearby or a soft hum in the background, imagine a night where all you had was firelight, your own thoughts, and the echo of someone humming in the next room. No rush, no buzz, just breath and the slow rhythm of darkness. And now, as your ancestors yawn once more and settle into their second sleep, let us drift forward into another curiosity where things got even stranger. Curl in close now, my sleepy companion. The night has grown quiet again, the kind of quiet where even the walls seem to exhale. And while your sheets are clean and your bath is just a warm tap away, tonight we'll drift into a time where personal hygiene took some interesting turns. Because for much of history, getting clean wasn't so simple, or common, or pleasant. Tonight's story may tickle your nose and wrinkle your brow, but don't worry. No actual soap required. Just settle in, and let's begin. We'll start in medieval Europe, where bathing had a bit of a reputation. It wasn't that people didn't bathe, not at first anyway. In fact, public bathhouses were once quite popular. They were steamy, social places, not unlike modern-day spas, where people soaked in hot water, scrubbed with rough cloths, and sometimes even enjoyed music. But over time, things changed. Plagues spread. Cities grew grimier, and a belief took hold that water, especially hot water, opened the pores. And through those open pores, disease could sneak in. So what did people do instead? They layered. They believed that if you couldn't clean your body, you could at least clean your linen. That's right. Underclothes, shirts, and chemises were washed more often than the people wearing them. Sometimes once a week, sometimes not. The fabric absorbed sweat, oil, dirt. And when it got too foul, it was boiled or beaten with lye soap and rocks. Bathing, optional. Shirt changing, that was the true cleanse. In fact, Queen Elizabeth I was famous for saying she bathed once a month, whether she needed it or not. A month, let that settle in. But before we judge too quickly, let's take a trip to ancient Rome, where cleanliness was next to godliness. Romans were obsessed with bathing. Every major town had public bathhouses, elaborate ones with hot rooms, caldarium, warm rooms, tepidarium, and cold plunges, frigidarium. People bathed daily, scraping their skin with a curved metal tool called a strigil to remove dirt and oil. Soap? Not quite. Instead, they slathered themselves in scented oils, then scraped it all off, dirt and all. Some even hired slaves to do the scraping. And when they finished, They'd lounge, sip wine, gossip, and debate philosophy, all while wrapped in towels and olive oil. Not bad, right? Now let's slide eastward to ancient Japan, where bathing was as spiritual as it was hygienic. The Japanese valued purification. Hot springs, called onsen, were treasured. Even commoners bathed regularly, pouring buckets of warm water over themselves before entering communal baths. Soap, made from rice bran and ash, left skin soft and lightly fragrant. Cleanliness was cultural, expected, taught early. Still, not everyone had access to luxurious water. In the deserts of the Middle East, water was precious, so people cleaned themselves with sand, yes, sand, using it to rub the skin clean. And it worked surprisingly well, especially for removing oil and sweat. They also used fragrant woods, herbs, and incense, not just for smell, but for spiritual clarity. Meanwhile, in 18th century France, perfume became the answer to everything. Bathing fell out of favor, but fragrance? Oh, it thrived. Wigs were powdered. Faces were powdered. Even pets were powdered. People wore pomanders, little scent-filled balls, around their necks or stuffed in their pockets to mask, well, everything. And lest we forget, there were vinegar wipes. Cloths soaked in rose or apple vinegar were dabbed across the neck and hands. A polite nod to cleanliness, minus the water. Let's pause now and think about tooth care. You brush twice a day, hopefully. But in many eras, chewing sticks were the toothbrush of choice. In India, twigs from neem trees were chewed into frayed brushes. In Africa, miswak sticks were used, naturally antibacterial, still sold today. Romans made toothpaste from crushed oyster shells, charcoal, and herbs. Europeans used cloths dipped in vinegar or salt. And some folks just didn't. Gums bled. Teeth blackened. But breath? Well, let's not imagine. As for deodorant, options were limited. People stuffed herbs under their arms. They dabbed vinegar. In some places, powdered aluminum was applied like chalk. In others, they relied on perfume. But many simply shrugged. Everyone smelled. That was just normal. Let's peek into Native American traditions where smoke was used to cleanse, not just spiritually, but physically. Herbs like sage and cedar were burned, their smoke fanned across the body. It deodorized, purified, sintered. Some tribes also bathed in rivers, scrubbed with sand, and oiled their skin with animal fat. It may sound strange, but it worked. And then there's the matter of hair. Washing it was rare in some eras, especially in Europe. Wigs became popular partly because actual hair got too tangled, too lice-ridden, too hopeless. Powdered wigs covered baldness, dirt, and everything in between. They were dusted with starch, scented with lavender or orange peel, and occasionally crawled with mites. If it got too bad, they shaved everything off and started again. Meanwhile, in Africa, hair was braided in intricate styles that preserved hygiene and beauty. Oils made from shea or palm kept hair healthy and clean. The scalp was massaged. The style lasted days, even weeks. And in China, long hair was wrapped, combed daily, washed with fermented rice water, a silky crown of patience and tradition. There's something strangely comforting in all of this, isn't there? People, no matter the century, the culture, the tools, tried. They wanted to be clean, to feel fresh, to care for themselves and others, even if it meant snails, vinegar, or rosemary smoke. And sometimes it even worked. So tonight, as you rest in crisp sheets, your skin rinsed clean with water that arrived with a twist of a handle, smile a little. You live in a golden age of soap. No ashes, no lye, no public rats in the bathhouse. And as the last whiff of rose-powdered wig drifts away into the night, let's float onward into our next dreamy tale. Good evening once again, traveler of dreams. Tonight, as you lie cushioned on a soft bed, your head nestled into a pillow, just the right amount of squishy, let's slip into a world where softness was a luxury and sleep came differently. Because long before springy mattresses and memory foam, there were ropes, straw, moss, and the occasional wooden block. Yes, tonight we're curling up in the past to discover how people actually fell asleep without the cozy tools we now take for granted. So breathe deep, let your body melt, and imagine a time when even a blanket was considered a treasure. Let's begin in a Saxon longhouse, somewhere in the foggy green folds of early medieval England. It's night. The fire has dimmed to glowing coals. The air is smoky, but it's the warm kind of smoke, the kind that's lived in the thatch for generations. The bed? Not a bed exactly, just a corner of the earthen floor, covered with old rushes and straw. If you're lucky, maybe a woolen cloth over the top, woven by hand. A dog or two curls at your feet, adding warmth. A sibling breathes softly near your elbow. Privacy? Not tonight. You pull a blanket, more like a heavy cloak, over your shoulders and settle in. The straw rustles. Your nose itches. But sleep comes anyway, because your body is tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying buckets and chopping wood and walking barefoot over cold ground. That kind of tired doesn't ask for luxury, just stillness. Let's drift now to 17th century France, where rope beds were all the rage. Yes, rope beds. A wooden frame, crisscrossed with thick ropes woven like a spider's web. Over this, a mattress filled with straw, hay, or if you were fancy, feathers. But straw was more common. It was called a tick, a sack stuffed tight and stitched shut. Every few weeks you'd refill it, or flip it, or beat it with a stick to even it out. If the ropes sagged, which they always did, you'd tighten them with a special tool, a bed wrench. Hence the saying, sleep tight. And if you didn't, well, you'd wake up in a hammock of rope and hay, your back bent like a pretzel. Now glide gently into ancient China, where headrests, not pillows, were used. Often carved from wood or porcelain, sometimes stone, they were cool and hard, shaped to cradle the neck, not cushion it. These weren't meant for softness, but balance, to align the body's energy, and to keep hairdos perfect through the night. The bed itself? A kong, a raised platform made of stone or brick, heated from beneath with a fire. Warm, firm, and shared by the whole family. There's something deeply grounding about sleeping on warm stone. In Viking homes, sleep came bundled under furs, beside flickering oil lamps, the sound of wind rattling the wooden walls. Straw was piled into recessed sleeping spaces, carved into the walls, a bedbox of sorts. It wasn't plush, but it was warm, and close, and quiet. And sometimes that's enough. In Africa, sleeping mats were woven from grasses, laid directly on the ground. Lightweight, portable, cool in the heat. Families gathered near one another, with netting to keep out bugs and woven cloth for cover. Sleep came not in isolation, but together, the rhythm of shared breath, the lull of stories passed down under stars. Meanwhile, in Japan, the floor was the bed. Tatami mats, a folded futon, thin but firm, stored away during the day, unrolled at night. Simple, clean, minimal. No creaking springs, no towering mattresses, just quiet and space. It invites a different kind of rest, one where the earth feels close. In early America, settlers made do with what they had. Corn husks, leaves, moss. Anything softish went into a sack to make a mattress. Logs were stacked as headboards. Quilts were handmade, thick and lumpy, but loved. And if you were out on the trail, you slept under the stars, wrapped in your cloak, with your saddle for a pillow, assuming your horse wasn't using it. Let's not forget Egypt, where slanted wooden headrests cradled the neck, elevated to keep hairpieces intact and perhaps to confuse mosquitoes. Beds were wooden frames with woven straps, somewhat springy if you squint. In India, the Sharpai reigned, a wooden bed frame strung with ropes, breathable, light, easy to move. You could tighten the ropes when they sagged, and when the wind blew, it sang softly through the weave. Even hammocks played a role. In South America, many slept in a hammock strung between trees, gently swaying, safe from bugs and damp ground. The sway mimicked the cradle, a comfort remembered in bones long before memory. All over the world, people found ways to rest, to close their eyes, to dream. They didn't always need fluff or springs or a blanket that costs as much as a week's food. They needed a place, a pause, a sigh. And so the world slept, on rooftops and under trees, beside fires and on stone slabs, on hay, on mats, in beds built by hand, on frames made of rope. Sometimes with pillows of wool, sometimes with heads cradled in the crook of their arm, and the dreams, they came anyway. So tonight, let yourself fall gently, not just into your bed, but into the long lineage of sleep itself. You are not the first to close your eyes with aching shoulders and a full heart. You are not the first to whisper goodnight into the dark, and you will not be the last. Now, as the straw settles, the rope tightens, the fire softens. Let us turn the page once more and drift into yet another curious slice of time. Welcome back, sleepy friend. Settle in now, your blanket snug around your shoulders, your pillow fluffed just right. The room is quiet, the hum of the world fading into a comfortable hush. Tonight, we step softly into the shadows of history, not into castles or grand halls, but into the alleys, barns, and back rooms where the strangest jobs once lived. These were jobs that no one envied, that were done without thanks, without comfort, and often without shoes. Tonight, we'll visit the forgotten workers, the ones who made civilization function, but who rarely made it into the paintings. Let's start with the gong farmer. Now, I know. It sounds delightful, like someone who gently taps gongs to help people sleep. But no. In Tudor England, the gong farmer was the man hired to empty the cesspits beneath public and private latrines. Human waste collected in great stone holes, and someone had to climb in and shovel it out. At night, by torchlight. Their tools? A long-handled scoop, a bucket, a strong stomach. They carried the waste out to dumping grounds beyond the city walls, or if they lived near a river, well, you can guess. They were paid well, because nobody wanted their job, but they couldn't work during the day. The smell was too much. The sight even worse. Gong farmers lived on the edge of town, quite literally, and often alone. Still sleepy? Let's meet the sin eater. In Wales and parts of England, some believed that sin was a tangible thing, a weight carried by the soul. And when someone died, their sins needed to be removed. Enter the sin eater, a local outcast, often poor and desperate, who was called to the home of the deceased. A piece of bread would be placed on the dead person's chest, sometimes cheese, sometimes ale, and the sin eater would consume it, eat the bread, drink the ale, symbolically absorbing the sins of the departed. He would then be paid and promptly shoot away. People avoided him, fearing he now carried too many sins. But when death came, they needed him all the same. He wasn't honored or invited to supper, but he did his job. Now, tiptoe into a Victorian household and meet the knocker-upper. No, not that kind of knockin' up. This person was hired to wake people Before alarm clocks, they carried long poles, some tipped with wire, others with small pebbles, and tapped on your bedroom window until you stirred. They worked early, rain or shine, cold or colder. Some used pea shooters to tap higher windows. Others memorized entire street schedules. Who needed waking at 4 a.m., who at 5. But who woke them up? No one really knows. Next, let's travel down into the damp mines of 18th century Britain, where young boys worked as trappers. These were children, sometimes just 5 or 6 years old, whose job was to sit in pitch-black tunnels and open and close wooden doors to control airflow. They sat alone, in silence, for 12 hours a day. No light, except the occasional flicker from a passing miner. No warmth, just darkness, the creak of the door, and the endless waiting. Many sang to themselves, or whispered stories, or counted stones for company. And when their shift ended, they walked home with coal-stained feet and sleepy eyes. Now let's wander into ancient Egypt, where professional mourners were hired to cry at funerals. Yes, cry loudly, dramatically, with wailing, tearing of robes, and face paint. It was considered respectful. The louder the mourning, the more honored the dead. Some mourners even trained to cry in tune, weaving melody into their grief. Others smeared dust on their heads, or cut their arms to show sorrow. And when the ceremony ended, they wiped their tears, packed their bags, and moved on to the next funeral. Let's not forget the leech collectors. In 19th century England, leeches were all the rage in medicine. Doctors wanted them by the hundreds, so someone had to gather them. These brave souls would wade barefoot into marshes and ponds, letting leeches attach to their legs, then pulling them off and dropping them into jars. Bleeding, dizzy, and often infected, they still trudged in every morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to buy bread. Or how about the resurrectionists? These were grave robbers, hired, yes, hired, by medical schools to supply fresh bodies for dissection, because cadavers were in short supply, and anatomy students were eager. So under the cloak of night, these men would dig up graves, cart away the bodies, and deliver them, often with a polite knock and a wrinkled bill. It was illegal, but it happened. Frequently. Now float to Renaissance Italy, where a profession known as the fuller existed. Their job? Cleaning woolen cloth. How? By trampling it in vats of urine. Yes, you heard that right. Urine, known for its ammonia, was collected, poured into tubs, and then stomped by barefoot workers for hours. The urine broke down the oils in the wool. The smell? Unspeakable. But the wool? Clean, sort of. And who could forget the lamplighters? Before electric bulbs, cities had gas lamps, and someone had to light them. Every evening, one by one, a man with a ladder and a long pole would move through the streets at dusk, lighting lamps, and at dawn he returned to snuff them out. Rain, snow, wind. He lit the way for others, but walked alone in the dark. There are dozens more. The rat catchers with their sacks and sticks. The mudlarks who scavenged river muck for coins and bones. The pin setters at bowling alleys who squatted between throws and hoped no one aimed early. The nightmen, the tanners, the chimney sweeps, the grave diggers, the coal heavers, the matchstick girls. Their hands were rough. Their backs were bent. Their names mostly forgotten, but they kept the gears of the world turning. And tonight we remember them. So as you lie back, clean and quiet, your sheets soft and your pillow cool, offer a tiny whisper of thanks to those who scraped and climbed and cried and shoveled, so that history could go on. And now, with the last lantern lit and the sin eater's footsteps fading into the fog, let's journey forward once more. Welcome back, my drowsy time traveler. The sky outside our little cottage is dimming again. The fire's glow is soft and golden, and there's a gentle hush in the room, that sleepy quiet just before supper. You can almost smell something warm bubbling in a pot nearby. Tonight we gather around a very old table in a world lit by tallow candles and hearth smoke to discover what people really ate for dinner in the Middle Ages. Because while history books love to talk about feasts, golden goblets, roast pigs with apples in their mouths, platters of songbirds wrapped in pastry, most folks weren't chewing on swan under stained glass windows. Most were peasants, and peasants had soup every single night. Let's step into a small cottage now. The roof is thatched, the floor is dirt, and hanging above the fire is a black iron pot that never really gets empty. This, my friend, is the heart of medieval dining. Pottage. What's pottage? Think stew, but less glamorous. It's made from whatever you could grow, borrow, dig up, or remember from last week. Leeks, onions, turnips, beans, and maybe a scrap of bacon if your neighbor was generous or your pig had a bad week. The pot stayed on the fire all day. You added water, stirred, tossed in new ingredients, and let it simmer. It was never quite the same twice. Sometimes it was thin and brothy, sometimes thick as paste, sometimes questionably green, but it was warm and filling, and it didn't require much chewing. Pottage was often eaten with a hunk of bread, dark, coarse, and made with rye, barley, or oats. Wheat was for the rich. You could tell how fancy someone was by the color of their bread. White bread, lordly. Brown bread, normal. Bread with pebbles in it, very normal. Yes, sometimes the millstones left little surprises. Ever chipped a tooth on toast? Let's not dwell. Now, if you were in a castle, things looked a little different. The Lord's table might see roast meats, boar, beef, venison, even peacock if guests were watching. But here's the secret. The meat often wasn't very fresh. Refrigeration, after all, was just a cold room and a prayer. So spices were everything. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, imported from faraway lands and worth more than gold. They masked the smell. They added mystery. They made old meat taste less old. Also popular, jellies. No, not strawberry. We're talking meat jelly. Think boiled bones and bits until the mixture gels. It was considered elegant, a shimmering slab of meat-flavored wobble. Appetizing? Let's move on. If you were a monk in a monastery, your meals were simpler but regular. Monks followed strict schedules. They ate at fixed times, often in silence, with food that reflected humility. Bread, beans, cheese, maybe fish. Meat was discouraged. Some orders had loopholes. They reclassified certain animals as fish, like beaver tails or barnacle geese. Creative interpretations of theology and hunger. Now let's drift to medieval Italy, where pasta was already taking shape. Sheets of dough, folded and stuffed. Flatbreads brushed with oil and garlic. Lentils with herbs, the beginnings of things we still eat today. Though back then, cheese was more pungent and olives had more bite. In the Middle East, meals included rice, lamb, chickpeas, dates, and spices that danced across the tongue. Meals were shared, eaten from communal bowls, often with flatbread as both utensil and companion. And across the world in Asia, while Europe was still debating whether tomatoes were poisonous, people were steaming dumplings, boiling noodles, and fermenting vegetables with the skill of centuries. Back in Europe, one constant ruled all meals: seasonality. You ate what was in season. No strawberries in winter, no lettuce in December, root vegetables in cold months, fresh greens in spring, apples in autumn. It was a rhythm of necessity. And fasting days, oh, so many fasting days. The church calendar was packed with them. On those days, Meat was forbidden. Fish, however, was fair game. So people got creative. Eels, herring, salted cod, fish pies, fish pudding, fish pretending to be something else. And for dessert, well, if you had anything sweet, you were lucky. Sugar was rare. Honey was the sweetener of choice. Honey cakes, spiced wine, maybe a fruit tart if you had butter to spare. And yes, peasants occasionally had dessert too. Oat cakes with honey, berries and milk, or even baked apples stuffed with dried fruits. But most days, dinner ended with more bread. Maybe a final spoonful of pottage, now cooler and thicker, a drink of weak ale or watered wine. And then the candles snuffed, the fire banked, bellies full, mostly. There's something humbling about it, isn't there? Knowing that for centuries dinner was a shared pot, a rough spoon, a piece of bread handed down the table. No takeout, no doorbells, just the day's harvest. And a bit of hope. And you know, it wasn't all bad. People talked more. They chewed slower. They noticed when the onions were fresher or when someone had snuck in a bit of dried mint. Every bowl told a little story. And now, as your own breath slows and your dreams begin to simmer like a pot over a low fire, let us slip into our next tale. Shh. The night is deep now. The stars blink slowly in a velvet sky, and the moon. Oh, the moon is watching, high above rooftops and rolling hills, above quiet towns and sleeping sheep. It glows, soft and steady, just as it always has. Tonight, sleepy traveler, we're going to talk about the moon. Not the science of it, not craters or orbits, but what people believed. Long before telescopes, when the moon was a mystery. And in those beliefs, strange, sweet, and sometimes silly, we'll find the soft heartbeat of ancient life. Close your eyes. Let the cool, silver light of old stories wash over you. Let's begin far back in the shadowy forests of ancient Europe, where people looked to the moon to explain everything they couldn't control. A full moon, that meant power, magic, transformation. Wolves howled louder. Shadows deepened. Dreams felt stranger. Some believed the full moon could cure sickness. Others believed it caused it. If your neighbor acted oddly, well, it must be the moon. The term moonstruck wasn't just poetic. It was taken quite seriously. Doctors, midwives, farmers, all had opinions on the moon. In ancient Greece, the goddess Selene drove her moon chariot across the sky each night, her silver robes trailing stars. Lovers whispered her name in the dark, hoping for a glimpse. And some believed if you slept in full moonlight, you might wake up different, changed, more beautiful, more wild, more something. The Romans called her Luna, and they used the moon to time everything from religious ceremonies to haircuts. Yes, haircuts. They believed cutting hair during a waxing moon would help it grow faster. Need a haircut? Check the moon. Let's float to ancient China, where the moon was not just a heavenly body, but a being. They told stories of Chang'e, the moon goddess who lived in a palace of jade with her companion, a white rabbit who forever pounded the elixir of immortality with a mortar and pestle. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, families would light lanterns and eat mooncakes in her honor, gazing upward and hoping to catch a glimpse of her silhouette. And that rabbit? He's still there. If you squint just right, you can see him too. In India, the moon, Chandra, was a god, cool and kind. His light was said to soothe the soul, calm the heart, and nourish plants. That's why rice was sown with the lunar cycle, why herbs were gathered at night, why lovers often met beneath his glow. Because moonlight was gentle but powerful. Even in ancient Egypt, where the sun god Ra was supreme, the moon had its place, represented by Thoth, the god of wisdom and time. He measured the days, marked the months, balanced the chaos of the stars. And when the Nile flooded, when crops failed, when the winds howled louder than prayer, eyes turned to the moon, because surely it had something to say. Now drift softly into a Celtic village where the moon was a calendar. Not months as we know them, but moonths, each tied to a tree, a ritual, a rhythm of the earth. Holly, ash, oak, planting, harvesting, resting. They carved moon phases into stones. Women tracked their bodies by the lunar tide. And at night, when the silver light poured over the hills, people gathered to sing, tell stories, and press their hopes into the sky. Even the Vikings watched the moon with respect. They believed two wolves, Skål and Hati, chased the sun and moon across the heavens. When one caught its prey, the world would end. So every eclipse, terrifying. Children were told to bang drums and shout to scare the wolves away. And when the moon reappeared, relief, celebration, and maybe a bit more porridge. In the Islamic world, the moon marked the sacred calendar, Ramadan, Hajj, all timed by its slender curve. In fact, the crescent moon became a symbol of divinity, order, and guidance. People looked up not just for beauty, but for instruction. In medieval Europe, moonlight was said to affect the humors of the body. Doctors consulted lunar tables before bloodletting. It was believed that surgery done on the wrong phase of the moon could lead to disaster, swelling, madness, death. Barbers knew, midwives knew, even farmers refused to plant on a waning moon. Crops needed the pull of moonlight, the same pull that stirred the tides and many believed our very blood. Let's pause here. Have you ever noticed how calm everything feels under the moon? How the world goes soft? That feeling, it's old. Older than us, older than cities or fences or glass windows. People used to sleep by moon cycles too. They'd wake in the middle of the night, just as the moon reached its peak, and pray, or write, or whisper secrets to the dark. Some called it the watching hour, a sacred stillness, a moment between dreams. And sometimes they just sit and watch. No candles, no noise, just the slow glide of silver across the sky. And here's something curious. In many old folk tales, the moon listened. You could tell it your troubles. Ask it for signs. A sliver moon meant change. A fat glowing orb, good fortune. A red moon, a warning. Sometimes, if you whispered a wish under the right moon, it might even come true. Of course, we know more now. About gravity, about cycles and shadows. But that doesn't mean the magic is gone. Look up even now, and it's still there. Steady, software watching. It has watched pharaohs and farmers, monks and lovers, you and me. And tonight it watches you sleep. So breathe deep. Let the silver hush of the sky wrap around your dreams. And as the moon tilts westward, let us drift once again toward another quiet corner of history. Good evening again, my quiet companion. The sound of raindrops has always had a way of softening the world. Tapping on rooftops, slipping down window panes, gathering in puddles with a sleepy plunk. Tonight, as the rain whispers gently outside, let's travel back to a time before phones, before screens, before scroll bars and podcasts and playlists. What did people do on a rainy day when there was no internet? No binge watching, no memes, no online shopping, not even a weather app to tell them how long the rain would last. Just you, the sky, and time to fill. Let's begin in a medieval village where the thatched roof leaks just a little near the door. You wake to the soft patter of rain on wool-covered wood. You can smell damp earth, wet straw, and yesterday's ashes. Outside, the fields are too soaked to plow. The roads are thick with mud. So, you stay in. What now? Well, first, chores. Yes, even rainy days had their duties. In the dim light of the hearth, you might mend clothing, darn a sock, patch a tunic, pick lice from seams, flick them into the fire, and keep on sewing. Stitch. Sip warm broth. Stitch again. Children would twist ropes or braid straw, maybe shell peas, or chase chickens out of the cottage. Again. And all the while the rain would sing its soft percussion on the roof above. In ancient Rome, rainy days were a break from the bustle. No grand processions in the forum, no marches, just slippers, cloaks, and warm oil lamps. People read scrolls by the window, rewrote old letters, played dice with neighbors, sipping watered wine and talking politics in the lamplight. Some curled up on couches, wrapped in woven blankets, and recited poetry, from memory, of course, or whispered gossip about senators with suspicious sandals, and the rain would echo in the marble courtyards, soft as a lullaby. In early Japan, a rainy day was an invitation, not an inconvenience. The sliding doors stayed shut, tatami mats soaked in silence, and families gathered near the low table for tea, pickled vegetables, or a quiet game of Go. Paper lanterns flickered. The scent of cedar and matcha hung in the air. Children listened as their grandmother told folk tales of fox spirits, moon princes, or ghosts that drifted down from rainy mountains. Rain meant stillness, a gift. In 18th century France, the nobility stayed indoors with parlor games, charades, riddles, card games with names too long to remember. Ladies embroidered silk handkerchiefs while gentlemen read aloud from novels they pretended to dislike. There might be a servant strumming a harp, or a cat chasing moths near the window. The rain blurred the gardens outside, turning fountains into shadows. But for most people, those without parlors or silk, rainy days were more practical. You sorted beans, you spun wool, you checked for leaks. You taught the littlest children to tie knots, peel onions, or braid garlic to hang by the chimney. In Africa, the sound of rain on thatched roofs was sometimes celebrated, a good harvest, a blessing. People pounded grain indoors, the rhythmic thump echoing with the rainfall. Children made toys from clay and twigs. Elders shared stories, rich, slow, alive with animal spirits and ancient wisdom, their voices rising and falling like the storm. In Victorian England, rainy days often meant reading, if you were literate, or watching the rain gather in rivulets on the glass panes. Dreaming. Families played dominoes, whittled, watched the fire. Some copied recipes, or practiced handwriting on slate with chalk. And in the chimney's crackle, you could sometimes hear the ghosts of forgotten lullabies. Even sailors trapped by weather in stormy ports found their ways to pass time. They carved little figurines from wood or bone, scrubbed their boots, polished brass, wrote letters they wouldn't mail for weeks, pages smelling faintly of seawater and longing. And when they tired of letters, they played music, fiddles, tin whistles, or just rhythm on barrels with spoons. In many homes, across many eras, rainy days meant togetherness. You couldn't go far, so you stayed close. Mothers taught daughters how to make salves from dried herbs. Fathers showed sons how to mend a boot or sharpen a blade. And when the chores were done, you rested. You watched the rain beat on the window. You made up stories. You stared at the fire and let your thoughts wander, back when wandering was allowed to take its time. Some people wrote poetry. Others just sat, with nothing to scroll, no timer, no updates, no buzzing pocket, just the steady hush of rain. And time. Sweet, unbothered time. So tonight, as the weather wraps your world in mist and puddles, think of all those before you who paused like this, in silence, in warmth, with raindrops for music and stories passed mouth to ear. It's not so different, really. Your blanket, their shawl, your book, their tail, and as the storm moves on, leaving behind the gentle drip of gutter and leaf. Let us follow it into one final dream. We've wandered far tonight, through ancient kitchens and moonlit myths, through rainy days and silent jobs long forgotten. But now, as the fire in our imaginary hearth flickers low, let's draw the covers up one last time and sink into the soft, slow rhythms of bedtime. Not your bedtime. Their bedtime. Because before alarms and electricity, before teeth-brushing timers and blue phone lights, people had night routines that were, in their own quiet way, wonderfully cozy. Let's step into one now, just after sunset, in a tiny 17th century farmhouse tucked into the English countryside. The chores are done. The goats are in. The stew has long since cooled. So you begin to ready for sleep. You bank the fire, pulling the coals together and covering them with ash so they stay warm until morning. You lay a few extra logs nearby, just in case. Then you latch the wooden shutters. One by one, the wind nudges at them, but they stay shut. Next, the candle. It flickers gently on the table, casting golden halos across the old wooden walls. You use it to guide you to your bedside, where a woolen blanket and a thin mattress of straw wait for you. But not just yet. First you kneel, whisper a prayer, maybe something about the harvest, or your neighbors, or the ache in your shoulder that hasn't quite gone away. You blow out the candle, and sleep, as they say, takes its time. Now drift across the world to a home in ancient Greece where bedtime looked a little different. Oil lamps were lit, filled with olive oil, the wicks floating lazily. The glow was softer than candlelight, more golden, more alive. Children gathered for stories, myths of gods and mortals told in calm, familiar voices. Fathers stretched on low couches. Mothers combed their daughters' hair with carved ivory combs. You might sip a little diluted wine. You might wash your feet in a basin. And then, wrapped in a linen cloth, you'd lie down on a mat or a low wooden frame and listen to the crickets start their song. In medieval Europe, night routines were deeply rooted in superstition and comfort. You placed a broom by the door to ward off spirits. You checked the corners for signs of bad luck. A spider spinning after dark could mean a poor harvest. Or good luck. It depended on the spider. You might leave a bit of bread out for house elves. Brownies, they were called. Small beings that helped with chores, but only if you showed respect. And when it was time to sleep, you'd climb into your box bed, a wooden frame with sliding panels, and close it up tight. Warm, dark, safe. In early Japan, night routines were like quiet rituals. You washed, carefully, face, hands, and feet. You changed into a clean robe, soft cotton folded just so. The futon was unrolled, smooth and neat, with a firm buckwheat pillow placed at the top. A single candle might glow near the window, casting shadows against the shoji paper screens. And before sleep, a cup of warm barley tea, or a moment of stillness, just breathing, letting the day leave the body. In ancient Egypt, bedtime came with a blessing. People burned incense, sweet, earthy, with hints of myrrh, to honor the gods and purify the air. Children slept with amulets under their heads, shaped like animals or eyes, to protect their dreams. And as they lay back on slanted wooden headrests, they whispered charms to ensure the soul returned safely from its nightly journey. Because dreams, they believed, were another world entirely, in cold northern lands, where winters were long and dark, night routines were about warmth. You heated stones by the fire and tucked them into the bed. You rubbed your feet with bear fat or oil. You wrapped your hands in cloth so they wouldn't crack from the dry air. And you sang. Soft songs in old tongues, meant to quiet the children and keep the wolves away. Sometimes the singing lasted longer than the daylight. In cities where candles flickered in upstairs windows and taverns emptied into cobbled streets, people ended their days in quieter ways. Shopkeepers locked their doors. Apprentices swept the floors one last time. A bell rang to mark curfew. And in narrow homes with crooked staircases, someone lit the final lamp and whispered a good night to the stars. In monasteries, bedtime was solemn and sacred. The day ended with Compline, the final prayer, chanted in low voices, the words rising like mist into the vaulted ceilings. The monks walked in silence to their simple rooms. No beds, just planks or mats, a blanket, a candle stub, and silence. Always silence. Even in the wild places, on ships, in wagons, under trees, night routines followed. A sword by the side, a cloak pulled tight, a quick look at the moon, maybe a story shared under breath, maybe a song hummed through cracked lips. Then stillness, always stillness, and maybe, just maybe, dreams. Because people dreamed back then too, of summer, of lost love, of food, of flying. And so tonight, you're not so far from them. When you fold your blanket just right, when you set your glass of water by the bed, when you dim the light and sigh, you're continuing a rhythm older than empires. You're part of a chain of sleepers, of dreamers, of storytellers, and fire bankers, and candle snuffers. And the world will keep turning, just as it always has. The moon will rise, the stars will blink, and the night will hold you. Softly, always softly. Thank you for wandering through time with me. If you drifted off somewhere along the way, let me know in the comments when you wake up. This has been Boring History for Sleep. Until next time, sweet dreams.